Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video I'm going to be showing you how you can get 10 times better on the piano with just a few changes to your practice routine and your mindset. A lot of people significantly slow down their progress when learning the piano by not knowing what to practice to be most effective and how to practice it. So in this video I will not only help you make sure you are getting the most out of your time playing the piano by telling you what you should be practicing and why, but I will also tell you exactly how to practice it. And you're going to want to implement all of these tips that I say, especially the last one, so make sure you stick around until the end of the video. So the easiest thing to do when practicing is to get straight into the things you want to learn and start learning it or making it better. But by doing this, you're missing out on 3 things that will make you so much better as a player. And scales can do all of these things. Now hear me out before you think I've heard about scales before. If you have or you haven't, I want to explain why they're important and how they can help your playing so much. So the first thing that scales can help you with is knowing key signatures and how they feel on the piano. Whenever you are playing any piece of music, it will always use a set of 7 notes. And you can see which set of 7 notes this music is going to use by looking at the start of a piece of music and seeing if it has any sharps or flats. If it doesn't, then you just play all the white notes on the piano. If it has sharps or flats, then that means you then have to possibly change the white notes to some of the black notes. But these sets of 7 notes aren't random. They come up time and time again. Practicing scales gets your hands so used to what all of these sets of notes feel like that when you come to play some music using particular sets of notes, you can immediately shut out all of the notes you know you won't be using. The second thing that scales help you with is control. When you play scales, you develop good hand independence because your hands are having to move at different times. Your thumbs have to go under and your fingers have to go over at different times in each hand. While doing this, you start to realise that you aren't really moving your hands independently. You just start thinking of scales and pieces as a series of events that happen hands together. As well as this, you may start to notice that your thumbs sound much louder than the rest of your fingers. And scales give you a good chance to get really good at evening out the volume and tone quality of your playing. You may find that your tone is good in pieces, but not realise that generally as a player, you find it hard to control your fingers. Practicing scales allows you to do this and become a much better player. You will learn pieces much faster because you won't be trying to force your hands to do something. You will have already developed the strength and technique to do most things. The third thing that scales help you with is getting your fingers warmed up and moving. Once again, this is a reason that is often neglected. If you try to sit down at the piano and go straight into a piece of music, you don't know if your hands are stiff, or loose, cold or hot, or affected by any number of other factors. If you practice scales, you give your hands a chance to stretch and feel the keys before you're going to trying to make a nice piece of music. So having given you plenty of reasons to practice scales, here is how I would practice them to get the most out of it. If you have no experience with playing scales, start with C major. In fact, even if you have experience with piano, I would still go back and practice this one and make sure you can use the right fingers and techniques every single time. This might mean playing very slowly to start with. Double check you know the correct fingers and make sure you use the scale to practice playing really relaxed and with curved fingers. Besides getting the correct fingers, the second most important thing to consider is consistency. You don't want to be playing a few notes and then pausing and then playing a few more. You need to try and go at a speed where you know you can keep going at a regular pace. The reason for this is because you want to try and iron out the weak spots in the scale in your head. So instead of giving yourself more time for these places, you're testing the weaker parts of the scale without making lots of mistakes. And you have to remember, if you make consistent mistakes, you are just learning these mistakes and making them a part of your regular playing. Once you have tackled C major, I would then move on to G major, then D major, then A major, then E major, because these all use the same finger pattern as C major, so you can get very used to that pattern while learning these different combinations of notes. If you have any questions about practicing scales, let me know in the comments and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. So now we've talked about scales, let's talk about sight reading. Sight reading is what many people consider to be the end goal, the thing that defines a good pianist. Everyone wants to be able to pick up a piece of music and just play it, without having to spend hours learning it. But what is confusing is that most people don't actually practice sight reading. This is usually because of a few reasons. The first being, it's too hard and not that rewarding, and the second being, it's hard to find things to sight read that are achievable but not too easy. So firstly, yes, it is hard. Learning to sight read is like learning to be fluent in another language. You've got to be able to instantly recognise the notes, have enough experience with rhythms, and your hands have to feel comfortable finding where they're going on the keys. So this does take time and you have to be doing it all of the time. Because of this, think of sight reading as something that you aren't going to see day-to-day improvements with. You will see the improvement retrospectively. So set yourself some slightly longer term goals and don't judge yourself until you've done it. So an example of this might be to sight read 3 pages of music every day for 6 months, and then at the end of that 6 months make a judgment about if you think you're a much better sight reader. I think you will be surprised at the progress you can make when you don't judge yourself too harshly every single day. Secondly, what you sight read doesn't really matter. The most important thing is that there isn't anything on the page that you don't understand. If there is nothing on the page you don't understand, and that includes key signatures, time signatures, symbols, words, note lengths, notes, etc. If you understand all of those things in a piece of music, then you can use that to practice your sight reading. So here is how to practice sight reading. The first thing you're going to want to do is prepare yourself. And by this, I mean make a quick analysis of the piece of music before you start. I usually do this in 6 steps. So step number 1 is to check the key signature, so you know exactly what set of notes you're going to be using. Then check the time signature, so you know how many beats there are in the bar and how the piece of music will generally feel. After that, check the performance markings. This is going to be things like allegro or rubato or any written words on the page that give you an idea as to what the style is. Step 4 is to check the dynamics throughout the entire piece of music to see if there are any changes or any dynamics that are going to be really important for the character of the piece of music. Step 5 is to check the articulation. So this means checking if any of the notes are staccato, which means short and spiky. You can see this if there is a dot above or below the note. This is also things like phrasing and slurs and anything that changes how you play the individual notes. If you don't understand any of these, ask away in the comments and I'll help you. Then step 6 is to have a go at playing it. If you go through each of these steps every time you come to sight read a piece of music, eventually they will become automatic and you will start to see that the same things come up time and time again. Let's use this piece of music as an example. So step 1, this piece of music has 1 sharp, so I know that's the key of G major, and the sharp is an F sharp. This means I'm going to be using all of the white notes except for an F sharp instead of an F. Step 2, the time signature says C. Now this means common time, which is the same as writing 4/4, which means there are 4 beats in the bar, so I will be counting 1, 2, 3, 4 in each bar. Step 3, performance markings. So there isn't a lot in this piece, but the metronome mark is 126 beats per minute, which is quite fast, and the piece is called gavotte, which is a type of dance, so I know that it needs to feel quite upbeat and dancey. Step 4, dynamics. So the piece of music generally looks to be around mezzo forte, which is moderately loud throughout, but it changes to forte, which is loud, on the second line, and on the last line it gets quieter before getting louder again towards the end to finish at the same volume that it started. Step 5, articulation. So this piece has some slurs in bars 3, bar 13 and bar 15, which means you're going to want to join these notes up but separate each group of slurs. And because this comes up a few times, it looks like it is a key feature of the piece of music, so it's probably important to try and include it. And step 6, now I've analysed the piece, I can have a go at playing it. When playing it, it's most important to keep a consistent speed. So if you need to go slower to make sure you can keep going, then that's perfectly fine. As I said, don't judge yourself too harshly. You'll see progress if you judge yourself after doing this every day for 6 months. If you are finding this video helpful so far, please make sure to subscribe and poke that like button. That would be very kind of you. Anyway, now let's talk about improvisation. So improvisation is once again something that people dare to dream of. Being able to sit down at a piano and write music, or be able to make something up on the spot, or even be able to do an epic jazz solo, are all things that many people wish they could do. They also happen to be things that are going to make you a much better musician. 10 times a better musician, I dare say. The reason for this is because in order to be able to improvise, you have to have a good understanding of music theory. And improvisation is essentially applied music theory. So where do you start with improvisation? Well, the best place to start is with music theory and with chords and scales. Yep, there's that word again, scales. So once you're able to run up and down a scale, you can start using it to improvise. The way to do this is to form some chords and make up a melody and try and use your ears to work out what sounds good and what doesn't sound good. From there, you can start to work out why it sounds good or why it doesn't using some music theory. So if we take C major as an example, the way to make chords in the key of C major is by playing any of the notes in the scale. Let's take C for example. Then miss the next note in the scale and play that key. Then miss the next note in the scale again and play that key. This makes something called a triad. A triad is the most standard type of chord you will find. Now you can make the shape starting on any of the notes in the scale, and because there are 7 different notes in a scale, there are 7 different chords you can use. To get started with improvising, I would try and pick 4 of these chords that work well together and play them one after the other in the left hand. In the right hand, try and use the scale to come up with a melody that you like the sound of. There is no right or wrong with improvising as long as everything that you play has intention and you are making choices rather than choices being made for you. You can try doing this using other scales, or you can also add notes to the chords to find sounds that you like and try different types of scales. But the key is to try and start making things up on the piano and finding sounds that you like. And then you will find before long that you're able to make things up on the piano without having to think too hard about what you're going to play and where you're going to go next. Although I haven't given you every piece of music theory that is going to get you going with improvisation, the key is to be inquisitive. Try and work things out and learn some music theory and try and apply it using improvisation. You'll become a 10 times better musician if you start applying and using what you know in a practical way. Another thing that will make you a much better musician is having the right mindset and making sure you have the right expectations when learning the piano. And if you want to find out more about what expectations you should have going into learning the piano, then check out this video about that very topic. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.